Welcome to today's episode. I'm Virginia Schauer, and it's my pleasure to introduce your host, Dr. Bill Bersing, who will be interviewing Dr. Jim Chambers on the topic, How to Get People to Change, the Secrets to Boost Team Performance Success in Program Management. Dr. Bill Bersing brings with him a wealth of experience in construction scheduling, costs control, and construction management information systems, having successfully executed large construction programs both domestically and internationally. And we're delighted to have Dr. Jim Chambers as our guest, a renowned expert in leadership development, organizational models, and human behavior. Dr. Chambers is the founder of the Institute for Organizational Leadership and has served as a doctoral faculty member at the University of Phoenix's School for Advanced Studies. I'm confident that our conversation today will be both insightful and engaging with these two highly accomplished professionals.
I thought that you'd be a good person to talk to about the challenges with program management and specifically leadership, anything with getting high performance teams, which is very important for generating successful programs and outcomes from the beginning to the middle to the end. I think you've had experience in many ways, and you give us some advice.
I appreciate being on. I think it's grateful for that. I'm always willing to share. Don't know that I've learned as much from success as I have from some of the challenges that go on with it. I finished up a couple of nuclear Navy projects, and then I was sent down to Brazil to figure out the challenge with the Navy was evolving around how to get people to change. And so I was deeply involved in that for several years, then got a call, worked with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Education in Brazil and the US, as well as some universities. They were trying to figure out how to get these universities to change in order to have matriculation between. So if you got a degree in Brazil, you could you also get a graduate degree in the United States. So it had to be a cooperative kind of thing. And the biggest challenge, of course, is dealing with the people, because in a lot of industries, and higher education is one, where people get very entrenched in the culture. And the same is true with military. I know you've had a lot of background working with military groups, and people do tend to get entrenched in the way things get done. And so when you're trying to, in the middle of a big program, big project going on, usually the programs have multiple projects, multiple team leaders, lots of moving parts. And then what I began to see was the real thing that none of us had been well trained in was dealing with the human side of it, right? The human factors associated with change management. So I was asked to do some research and do some homework and come up with a way to help with that, to teach managers of very large global kind of projects, both inside and outside of academics, military, other government agencies, so on. So anyway, I dug into it for about 4 or 5 years and really got pretty good at it, and finally decided just boiled it down into 5 different things that I would go in when I would get hired, like I was in Brazil for a couple of years, go in and teach people how to deal with these 5 things. And what we saw were extraordinary results of much less resistance, projects getting done on time, teams working together more effectively, managing through the risks and the bumps and bruises that kind of go along with large projects. So anyway, I just boiled it down into 5 different things and began to look at it as a conceptual model that could be translated into anything. People have used it all over the world since then. Even had someone come back from Russia not long ago saying that they had run into people using it in Siberia, of all places. I'm not interested in visiting there. I'll stay here.
Now.
But I had a guy call me and he said, wow, I was in Siberia, Russia. I saw your stuff there and it's really been helpful. So anyway, it was just in my sort of simple world, I wanted to boil it down and be able to share it with people so they could, because most of us running projects have not had a lot of time to get really adept at understanding human behavior and the response of behavior. I just felt like it was it was like a gap in the learning managers.
Is it more like EQ or IQ?
That's one dynamic. Yeah, that is
emotional
part.
intelligence and versus intellectually
Yeah.
intelligent.
Yeah. That
Which
one.
can you list some of the I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
put you on spot, but yeah, that'd be
No,
great.
that's fine.
I think within risk management, change management, these are really good
Yeah.
topics. Virginia,
Yeah, because when
yeah,
we're in those environments and we're trying to bring about change, we're managing risks on one side, right? And we're trying to accomplish, our mission on the other side, and we're trying to navigate through the waters of all of that. As you've managed many projects more than I have, the project itself is a process of change. Just because you know what the end result needs to be, you don't know how to navigate through all the various things. Lots of things change, especially if it's even if it's a short-term 3-month or 6-month project, stuff changes. If it's a longer-term project, like 1 or 2 years, lots of stuff changes. So as a leader, you've got to learn how to manage the human side of that change so that you don't lose your team members, so that you don't discourage them, they don't lose their focus. People drop out for different reasons. I don't want them dropping out because they get discouraged or worn out or burn out or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I'll walk them through real quick and you can
that's
just,
great.
you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So the first thing we found was in our work was the leadership needs to demonstrate empathy, and I'll tell you why. So change, any kind of change is very personal. People take it personal. Even if it's not personal, it is. And the reason for that is the second thing, and that is change involves a certain amount of loss. So even if you move my cubicle, I've got to give up my cubicle to get the new cubicle. I've got to give up my laptop to get the new laptop. And so it doesn't matter what it is in the course of a project, I'm going to be asked to change. That's fine, but it's personal for me. And I'm having to move, I'm having to shift parts of the project. I've got new team members coming on, old team members going off. Maybe we've decided to change directions. The corporate leadership has decided to go a different way. So all this work we did the last 3 months is just going to go away and I've got to start over. So whatever it is, I take it personally and it's a sense of loss. There's a guy who's not around anymore. It was a great psychotherapist named Morris Shechtman. And he wrote a book about this, Working Without a Net, I think is the name of the book. He made the good argument that project leaders would do a better job if they understood how people deal with loss, like the loss of a friend, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, going through a divorce. If we understood more about how they process loss, we would be able to understand how they deal with change, because change causes us to have to give up something. And so Shechtman did a good job with that. And I had some conversations with him about that, about going through the process of grief. Let people grieve. They need time to grieve when you pull them out of one thing and put them into another. So you need to have a great deal of empathy, not sympathy. You don't have to get in the woods with them. You don't have to get in the mud with them, but you have to understand empathetically that they're giving up something to get something. So that was the first thing. The second thing was understanding human behavior. 2 things on that. Humans are extremely complex, highly complex, emotional, spiritual, psychologically, physiologically, every direction. We're highly complex, and we know that. But what we don't often realize is that we're very predictable. People's behavior is extremely predictable. And so we have a lot of tools for that. We have personalities. We know now by the work of a couple of guys from Georgia years ago that personalities are highly predictable. You can use simple assessments to get at the basic 4 types of personalities, 4 or 5, depending on the matrix. And then the 16 under that and the 32 under that. After that, you're in a clinical setting. People's personality, you can identify. When you get good at it, I can go into a restaurant and spend 5 minutes. And whoever's serving me, I can tell you just about, because it's not that difficult. So personality is based on needs-based behavior. In psychology, we call it that. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to have my needs met. Doesn't mean I'm selfish. It just means that's how I'm wired up. Then you go to values. Values have to do with my core beliefs. So after I get my needs met, if I feel like my needs are being met in a reasonable way, now I'm going to start judging things by what I value the most. And we have values inventories that help us understand on a team what the basic values of team members are, what their core is. And that way we can work with that and work with them. It sounds more complicated than it is. And then you switch into leadership styles, learning styles, communication styles. So if you get a little bit of education in those areas, the human side of it, how people are reacting to you and responding to change within the team, it becomes really predictable. And you can say, I know Mary's going to behave like this. John's going to respond like this, and so on. And so you can map out what you're going to do, which brings you to the third thing, which is to communicate. You can't communicate the same way to everyone. It doesn't work. So the two things that our work emerged was say it early and say it often. Tell people early. Tell people early on what's going to happen. I've met so many team leaders over the years and corporate leaders, because I've done a lot of boardroom. We don't want to tell them until the last minute. That's the worst thing that can happen, because remember, it's personal and it's loss. So if you wait to the last minute, then it's going to be a shock. It may be a shock anyway, but you're waiting to the last minute. You're setting the team up for more failure. And you need to say it often. Once you start saying change is coming early in the process, then you begin to say, here are the benefits. Here's why we changed. And so we mapped out a whole way of doing that. So let me hit the last two and then we'll just open it up. But the fourth thing is involve everyone. Don't leave anyone out. So many projects go down the tubes because only a few people are in the know. There's only a handful of people that are in the meetings. And I used to make the argument of this. You do corporate projects, military projects. We only want a few people to know. No, we don't. No, at some point we want everyone to know, and we want to listen on the front end. So the way you do it, here's something I've used over and over, and it's absolutely 100% true. People don't resist their own ideas, right? If it's your idea and you've thought through it, your resistance is going to be really low. If it's just my idea and I'm forcing it over on you, then you have a tendency to back up and go, wait a minute, I didn't even have a chance to think through this. So listen on the start. So in my projects, we would spend a good deal of time helping the program leaders, the program managers, team leaders learn how to listen, not to talk, but learn how to listen. You don't have to agree. You're not there agreeing with everything that they say. You're not a psychotherapist or anything, but you're giving them a chance to talk it through, because a lot of people are verbal processors and they need to talk about it. And if you don't talk about it with them, they're going to go out to dinner and talk about it anyway. So learn how to listen really carefully and listen for certain things. And then you need to involve them in some way. Get their opinion. I've tried this multiple times, and it sounds like I'm tricking you, but it's not. If I get people in a room and I get them to talking and I engage them in it and they feel like they're a part of what's happening, I can almost go out of the room and do anything I want to do, and they're going to go with it. That's true. Yeah. It's crazy, but it's true. And I've had CEOs do this. They would just go in, involve everybody, and then take a left turn. Everybody goes, oh, he listened to us. He heard what we had to say. She listened to us. She heard us out. We all got a piece of it. And she's doing the best she can. So we're going with it. And then the last thing is you do need to anticipate some resistance. There's always going to be resistance. And so the way you deal with that is you just understand that resistance is going to be normal. You got this. If you have kids, hey, where do you want to go on vacation? Oh, we're going to go to Disney. We're not going to go to Disney this year. You better expect some resistance. That they're going to want to do what meets their needs, not yours. So you can expect a certain amount of resistance. But here's the kicker. Disloyalty, if you follow this model, disloyalty is rare, if not zero. People will not exit. They won't be angry. They won't hold a grudge. They won't sabotage the project. in any way. They'll give 100% because you understood how to be empathetic on the front end. You understand something about the difference between Mary and John's personalities and communication. Mary wants to know in a room with a bunch of people. John wants to know privately over a cup of coffee. So you've worked through all of that. You communicated everybody early and often. You involve people at every level if you can. They're not going to be disloyal. They're not. What we found is, in fact, they are now invested in this thing at a deep emotional level that you would have not gotten otherwise. So that's just a very simple 5-step model. It's very easy to follow, easy for team leaders to get a hold of it. And it seems to help. Yeah. It's not perfect.
Communication is everything. It covers change management. It covers risk management. It covers everything that we've discussed in the last 3-4 episodes or weeks that we've had these discussions as well. So I'm trying to do that as well. I'd like to just cover each one of those, and then maybe we can have a little discussion on each one.
Okay. The first one is to demonstrate some empathy because change is personal and change involves a sense of loss. You got to give up something. So if the person over you isn't understanding and empathetic toward that, it builds some resentment in there, right? Like you just want your way and you don't care what's happening to me. I'm the one having to make the change. Yeah. But so that sense of letting me know that you're empathetic to, you're not manipulating me. You're just understanding the pain that I'm going through.
Yeah. So my examples, you did give an example of just having exposed to death immediately. I had Naples had a death of one of our accountants who was a major part of our program in projects. And that was hard. So everybody, of course, had empathy, but our customer didn't. They didn't care. And the communication wasn't even there. They didn't know for 3-4 months because maybe it was my fault, but it wasn't my position to tell them that this would happen.
Right.
I didn't even know. I knew, but I didn't know how problematic it was to our invoices and to the things that we did on the program before that. And then I'd see just so many narcissistic leadership. They didn't give a crap. Your grandmother could die and they just didn't. They would think that you're making up something.
When the people over you come in and say, and I had this happen because I did a lot of work with electronic records management in the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
We're writing curriculum. One team's writing curriculum over here and the other team's writing the code. The code rules, right? And code writers are the people that rule. So they would write code for 3 or 4 days. This team over here would write the curriculum for training. And then the coders would come in and say, hey, I'm sorry, but the hospital changed their mind. And so all that work you did last week, it's out the window. We got to change directions. Coders are not known for being empathetic. And no offense if the coders it's the world they live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so teaching them to understand that the instructional designers are going to have to change gears now and redo everything they just did. Rather than coming over and say, hey, throw that out, we're going a different direction. They come over and demonstrate some sense of empathy that you guys just did a week or 3 months of work that's now going to have to all be adjusted. It really makes a difference in understanding that how important empathy is in that. And so I would teach the leaders to the coding side, that real techie people, hey, come over and sit down, talk to them. Understand they just did they stayed up till midnight to meet the deadline. And now the deadline really doesn't matter because they're going to have to redo it. So that's just one example of going through it rather than opening the door. And I saw this happen several times. Open the door to the instructional design room and say, hey, we're not doing that. And then just leave it.
And just close the door and say, do it. Yeah, no, so I developed these construction management information systems and I did it for large design build projects. And I had this guy who supposedly could make changes, didn't understand what was going on and make changes like that, whether they were good, bad, or indifferent. There was no empathy on his part. He was like, no, do it here. I'm like, all right, I'm done with this one.
No, it's just, you lose your enthusiasm almost immediately when that happens. And this is where Shechtman comes in. Shechtman would say, yeah, because you get a phone call, my best friend just passed away.
Yeah.
You hang up and you're just going to what Durkheim called an anomie. You're in a no man's land there for a minute, a sense of normlessness. You don't know what to say. You don't know whether to cry, how do I express myself? When someone makes a change on a big project like that, they just announce we're going to go different direction, and they don't give people a chance to process, then it creates a resistance, right? It creates sometimes anger, but more than not, disappointment. I'm just disappointed you didn't trust me enough to let me know what's going on or involve me in the process. So now you're not getting 100% of my attention because it's just a disappointment, and that's what happens in leadership a lot. We disappoint people.
Do you feel like leadership does, in some aspects, have no understanding of what their voice is saying when they say it?
After 40 some years of it, I do believe there are a few people that just don't even care. Yeah. I do. But the majority of leaders that I've worked with over the years, they've never had anyone sit down with them and talk them through how to do this. Having been a business owner myself, I ran the Institute for Organizational Leadership for 30 some years. You've got pressures on every side. I've got budgets. I've got staffing issues. I've got projects. I've got clients. I've got the government to deal with. You're surrounded by your own set of issues. So if you go down to the accounting department and say, hey guys, we're going to change programs next week, get ready to migrate all that data, and you send people into a tailspin. And as a leader, you don't have time to deal with this. I have time to explain it. You don't think you do. But then when 5 of your bookkeepers walk out and you're having to pick up the pieces, you should have taken that extra time to demonstrate some sense of empathy toward it. So yeah, I understand leadership has its own pressures, but one of your jobs is to keep people on task and focused.
And do you believe that part of empathy is also sharing with them the bigger picture?
Absolutely.
Coders have this, they're in a frame of mind of, okay, this is the small box that I'm living in, but allowing them to understand that the bigger picture of the project and why the change has to be implemented.
Exactly. Yeah. And that just takes you to the second thing of understanding people, understanding humans, because really we're all alike. We're a lot more alike than you think we are. And I'm not on a pigeonhole tech workers, people that work in technical jobs, not technology, technical kind of jobs. They are very myopic. They have to be. Yeah. I work with nurses for 16, 17 years, nurses and doctors. You take a doctor, you take a heart doctor, that person's got to be absolutely myopic focused on their job. And now you're coming in telling me I got to use a computer, I got to do something differently. So it doesn't matter if you're at the high end of the food chain or you're just a computer person in an office doing something or a bookkeeper or something. You are myopic by virtue of the job you're in. So you need help understanding the bigger, wider picture.
And yes. So the second one is understanding the personality and how to approach, communicate with the different people. So is this the one where you're saying that people have to, I guess you gave the example of the management getting people involved and you getting people involved in discussion and walking away and making the decision. And as long as you have them discussing it and openly voicing their opinions, no matter what you did, it was a
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On number two, on understanding people, we just use a lot of inventories. It just tells me right up front. It's better for me to communicate with Virginia, give her a call, talk to her personally about it. It's better for me to communicate with Bill, having him in the meeting, and we'll all discuss it, right? It's just based on a little bit of understanding, not getting at a clinical level, just a general understanding of those things. The third thing in communication, that's where it's this issue of you need to tell people early on, let them know early. They don't like the first one, surprises.
First one that we do for personality and how you communicate. And I think it's done on all of my projects because I started doing it earlier in my career and realized how important it was doing these client expectation surveys,
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember talking to you about
hey, how do you communicate? What do you do? Talking to them, getting together, just say, hey, do you prefer email or have direct or indirect or
right.
you take your directions from your boss and then you talk to me? How do you communicate with the rest of the staff and me and everybody else. So those things are really important. So
it's super important to ask, how would you like me to communicate with you? How would you like me to do that? Because everyone has a different preference. Some people nowadays, a great deal of us like text. I can respond to a text in a heartbeat. I'm out here in the middle of the ocean on a boat. I can answer a lot of text, but if I have to sit down at an email and go through a bunch of emails every day, that's and then try to communicate early and often. That's a challenge sometimes. You're busy. The project's going. You got a lot of moving parts. You got a lot of risk that you're trying to mitigate. And then you're thinking, the last thing I have time to do is to communicate with these people. But that's what you need to be doing. And this is what we found in our work was when you're just so busy, you forget to tell people, and then they find out something, and now you're having to backtrack. So it's there used to be a commercial on TV for oil filters. You could pay me now or pay me later.
Yeah.
You don't want to change your oil. And it's like that. So I would tell leaders, listen, learn how to communicate early and often, because you're going to have to do it one way or the other. You're either going to do it on the front end on your terms, or you're going to be backing into it, explaining yourself. And you're much better off. You're going to get much more mileage out of people if you say it early and often instead of wait till there's a problem. Judy's walking out the door with her briefcase and you're wondering why you didn't tell her. You didn't talk to her. You didn't explain to her team what was happening. And now they're all upset and she quit. You're going to spend a whole lot of time managing that as opposed to just communicating in the first place.
So is it better to invite people to all these meetings, especially virtually? We can have meetings on everything. In the programs, we have meetings and you should be focused on what you have and what your value is. But sometimes if you don't invite people, they take it like, hey, you're not communicating. You're not involving me in this. So how
absolutely
these large programs, if nobody has time to attend all the meetings, especially
right. Which brings you to number 4, involve everyone. So one of the strategies would be, and I'm the guy, Scrum meetings.
Yeah.
I hate Scrum meetings.
Yeah.
They keep interrupting my focus. And in my work, if I'm writing, if I'm, developing curriculum, I'm developing something new, that takes a lot of my time. I have to focus. I can't be distracted by going to meetings once an hour. I had a project in DC where every hour, I think you and I got together then, had dinner when I was up there. Every hour I had to have a 15-minute meeting. And it's just maddening. So you need to limit. So here's the key is limit the number of meetings, but make them accessible. So if I have time to attend and my feedback's necessary, I can. If not, I might just listen in and not participate. So you're involving me in that process, but you're not. And I know we have to have certain meetings, have to have it, but you don't want to overload with people with meetings and then they don't get their work done. But you need to make the meetings accessible to them so that they're not surprised by what's going on. That makes sense?
It does. It does. I sometimes I make it optional for people to come and go. And I find that most people just listen in, and it's probably pretty good that they do, especially on these larger.
It's when you don't allow access that you get pushback.
Knowing the significance of what you're doing, I think is really important. Leadership sometimes we don't tell people why this program's so significant, why their job as a scheduler or cost estimator is significant to other people. And they're like, okay, I'm just cranking it out one more time. You've already asked me this question. I'm going to do it again. And then they take 2 weeks to do it. And they think their job security is based on.
Well, and think what happens when you have to make a change. Yeah. You have to have a course change. We sailed up here from Boston. We went to a couple different ports on the way. Yesterday, we sailed all day in a fog. It was dense fog. You could barely see 100 yards out in front of this boat. And we're in shipping lanes. We're out in the Atlantic and we're having to dodge lobster traps, thousands of them. And there's just 2 of us on a 48-foot sailboat. So everybody's got to be involved in what's going on. I can't go take a nap and then wake up and the captain. Well, there's no telling how many hundreds of course changes we had to make yesterday to dodge around things as we're coming up because we couldn't see clearly. If we'd had 3 miles of visibility, it'd be different. And I think that's a good an analogy, a parallel. Sometimes people in the trenches, they're looking 100 yards ahead of them. They can't see it. You're the leader. You're seeing 3 miles ahead. So involving me in that, I stood, if you could see where I'm at, I'm in a cabin. I stood out here on the side of the sailboat, giving the captain information as we were going. We had to share information back and forth. And that's where the whole involved thing is. Get people involved. And again, I'll go back to this. People don't resist their own ideas. Listen to me, I may have a horrible idea, but if you'll listen to me and then you tell me what we're going to do, I'm not going to resist that. If you don't involve me and you don't listen to me, I will resist. It just is the fight and flight kind of deal.
So this is where I came up. Own and manage processes and procedures. I'm always pushing this. You have to own and manage your process and procedures. I can't go in and say, here's the process, even though I've done it before and I know that's the perfect one.
Right.
Write it. And this is for your organization, not for anything else. I can't just hand this to you and expect people to run with it. So I've always said, here it is. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Maybe you should change it, or maybe you should do your Visio or this, that. And then they get taught, maybe this is this and that. Oh yeah. And then they come up with the same I did, but in their own little way and version. And then I say, you own it, you manage it. So I get that one person to do the change management process, and they're the ones that manage it. And then I say 2 or 3 other people that can work with you under this in case we need to change this, or just to be in the meetings to be able to look at this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great example.
Yeah.
That's a great example of engaging them in a way that they have skin in the game. They have a vested interest now in the whole success of it, as opposed just from top down. Change has to come both ways. You can't have change coming just from below. You have to have it both ways. But when everyone gets involved, and like I said, humans are an interesting creature. If I listen to you and I listen empathetically and you genuinely feel that you were heard, genuinely, you left the room saying, he listened to me. I might have had some crazy ideas. I might have had some good ideas, but he listened to me. He involved me. He didn't shut me out. You can almost go do most anything, and I'm going to be on the team. I'm going to give you my best. You don't have to do what I'm asking, because a lot of times the leadership knows what needs to be done. They've done it 100 times, but they don't take the time to engage people. And then they're shocked when there's resistance in the process.
Another good example was transactional leadership. I've seen it more than once. The project goes to hell. You're in the middle of it, not at the beginning. You know what's going on. These supposed leaders are people that are professional engineers, very myopic. They know what needs to happen. So they have A, B, and C, and they say, okay, this is what we need to do. Boom. And it doesn't. Right. Why doesn't it get done? Because nobody's freaking listening to them.
Right.
They're not listening. No. They're not getting engaged, and why there's nothing for them. They have no needs. They're like, if you know how to do it, then just do it yourself. And that's what they need. They need somebody to take it on, take that off of their shoulders. Instead, it's on their shoulders. They're the ones running for it. And it's just one stress after another versus managing it, listening up front, understanding it, developing that team. And then I've always said long-term continuity, and that would follow. Right. Listen, you have that long-term continuity, and that's what you're saying all along. If you don't have that, we have to be cognizant. There's never going to be not a change on a program or a project. There's especially
absolutely
your little project. You're going to have people leaving, people coming, people going, and there's always got to be. But if you have the process procedures all lined up and you told everybody, hey, this is our program, get engaged. But if the accountant decides to do something else, or in a motorcycle accident like my accountant, then you have it covered.
That's a perfect example of what I was saying earlier about you're either going to spend the time as a leader, you're either going to spend the time to listen to people, engage them on the front end and as you go through, or there's going to be some catastrophe that you're going to have to do it anyway. You're going to have to deal with it one way or the other. I would rather deal with it on my terms in a positive way. And like you, I've worked with a lot of engineers and people that are real focused on their work. They have to be. When I was doing work for the nuclear Navy, you can't get any more focused than those people.
Okay.
They have to be, you can't drop the ball once. You can't afford it. People die.
How about those guys?
And, yeah. Same with physicians, with surgeons and so on, with nurses, with other technical areas. When you drop the ball there, people's lives are on the line. And so you appreciate that focus. So you need to take more time to listen, to engage them, find out what's going on, not once, but multiple times. And then you get to that last part of anticipate some resistance. The resistance may not be about you at all. It may be, there's a thing we call triangulation in leadership counseling, where someone reacts to you and you think it's personal, but they're really reacting to somebody else. They had a boss like you. They had a team leader like you. So they're reacting. They're actually talking to the other person. They're actually resisting what you're saying because the last team leader they had was transactional, not transformational. And so if I anticipate that I'm going to get some resistance and we're going to work through it, if you ask me for examples of that, one of the things you can do is you can ask questions. Why is this bothering you? What's troubling you early on? What do you think the challenges are going to be in your area? If we know we're going to make changes, we're going to navigate through the fog here. What do you think the challenges are? How can we overcome them? How can we anticipate what's going to happen? That way, your resistance to the stuff when it happens, when the change comes, the resistance is not there. I might still not like it, but I'm not going to resist it. I'm not going to push back. I've had people, I've sat as an observer and watched meetings where people get up and go out. They're angry. They're frustrated. They want to quit. They're not going to give their best. You've lost them for the next month because they're just upset. They're going to go out to dinner and talk about it with someone else. They're going to have cocktails or wine and dress you down anyway. You might as well get on the front end of it. And that's where I say, if you do what we found in our work over a 30-year period was, you almost never have disloyalty. You won't have people sabotaging the project. You won't have people exiting out early. And you won't have people emotionally distraught because of the changes that are happening. They're comfortable with it now.
How does risk management play into this? Because everything that we've spoken about, especially with the last one, has to do with risk management. If I outline all the risks involved and then I say, this is how we're going to deal with it, that checks that box, the last point that you have.
Absolutely.
It's just so freaking hard to do that thing. Unless you do it every month, you have a bigger program and to get everybody engaged. People don't like to, maybe it's changed. They're not used to it. But for me, change management or this risk management approach is extremely important. There's both the quantitative and the qualitative side of the whole thing.
I'll give you my perspective on it. One of the challenges with mitigating risk is that leadership, and I'm just not picking on leaders here. I hope people understand that because that's my whole life is helping prepare leaders. But as leaders, we tend to think that we're the ones who can identify the risks and we're the ones who can find a way to mitigate it in some way. When in reality, you're not the guy in the trenches. So if you'll cycle back on, and I know you've done this because we've had this discussion a few times over the years, ask them what the risks are. What's the risk in your area? And if so, if this happens, what are you going to do about it? What can we do to keep it from happening? What can we do if it does happen? And let them engage in that at a very deep level with it. And when this stuff happens, one of the couple things I've learned, one is they'll report that something's about to happen way beforehand because you're not going to have passive aggressive behavior occurs when somebody goes, you know what? We're going to have a crash and I'm not going to tell him. He's such a jerk. She's such a pain. Yes. Why would I tell them? They know everything. They never asked me. I've seen this in software development, computer technology. Tech people sit back there with their arms crossed and go, you know what? Let it go. I'm not going to say anything. And they will too. And they'll sit back there. And then you're the smart guy. You're supposed to figure out how to get us out of it. Try to engage them in it. Find out what the real risks are. I had a guy tell me this in New York. That was a couple of years ago before I retired. We're sitting in an IT. This is one of the largest hospital systems in the country. And I'm in the IT department meeting with some technology leaders. And this guy's sitting there with his arms folded, and he said, they never asked me, so I never told them. And now we got to crash. We got to shut down and start over. And I'm sitting there as a consultant listening, and I was on his side. They never bothered to ask the guy. He ran the servers, the security. They never asked me. So what do you want me to do? And so that's just a great little example of, he folded his arms, leaned back in his chair. He said, I knew what was going to happen. No one's listening to me. And so I think you could get around that by engaging them in the risk management discussions.
No, I'm laughing because I had a case where they were sent me from Norfolk to California, the Navy did, to look at this computer program. And I attended it, gave some presentation, attended some conference, and the leadership got up and talked about it, how great it was and this and that. And I was young at the time. So I went out, had a beer with some of the guys who were actually doing the work and had programs. And they just had no confidence on any of this. They couldn't get the right computers. They couldn't do anything. Of course, I go back to Norfolk and I tell my leadership what's going on, and I get burned for reporting the bad news.
Sure, of course.
There's the thing, Virginia, if you haven't noticed, about shooting the messenger. And I'm telling you, that exists. And I've seen it more than once. And by me,
unbelievable,
from your mistakes, I am never going to be that messenger again.
Yeah, I've been down that road too. And I'm like, you know what? You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that girl. Yeah.
But even if it's obviously just something that just stares out at you, you got to tell somebody. I don't know. Let somebody else do it.
Yeah. Just pass it off.
Yeah.
I keep coming back to the idea. I loved what you said. People don't resist their own ideas, and thinking of that metaphor of leaders being on their high horse. And then if they would just step off of the horse and step into the battle with the people that are on the ground, and let maybe one of the people that are on the ground sit up on the horse, because they've been doing this. They've been probably doing this as long or maybe even longer than you have in some cases. And they are an expert. And so allowing them to be the expert in what they know, it empowers them and it allows them to feel accepted. Because I've seen too in leadership where someone will have a great idea that's maybe not great, let's be honest. And the leader will immediately shut it down. And that is a problem.
Yeah. That creates a barrier that you do that several times in a meeting. And what happens is your brightest and best people will not speak up because they don't want to be shut down like that. They don't want the humiliation of it. And you're not now when it's an emergency situation, and this sailboat's a great example. We had to get out of harbor in a 7 knot current coming at us. This is a almost 50-foot boat. It is more than 50 feet with all the pieces. So we have to get out into this current without allowing the boat to back up and slam into something or someone else's boat or whatever. There's only 2 people on here on this trip. So the captain has to be straight up direct. Do it this way. Do it now, right now. Let go, hang on, whatever the case may be. So it isn't about making you feel good, right? So I'm the first mate. And his job is not to make me feel good. His job is to get us safely off the dock and into the water. There are times in projects where you need that kind of leadership. We're in an emergency. We're in a situation, right? But that's not most of the time. Yes,
on some of the
like I said,
work.
Yeah,
but it's not. You're right.
It's not. But leaders get in, don't they? They get into that mode of transactional dictation. Now, once we got out of the harbor and we're in the ocean, we had all day to sail, right? The beautiful day. We both enjoyed it. We got here. We had a high five, had a great dinner, celebrated our trip. So what happens is leaders get into that dictatorial mode on the front end and they never get out of it. And the team members, and Virginia said it, this is it. I'll just shut down. I'll just emotionally, and I don't think it's always intentional. It's just part of their behavior, their human nature to shut down. I have 10 good ideas, but you don't want to hear them because I just heard you shut down Ron. You slammed him in the meeting. You think I'm going to speak up? I'm not. So yes, most of the ideas that come out of those team meetings they're not practical. They're not plausible. And the leadership knows that, but that's not the time to tell people that.
I used to do this analogy. You have a big group of people, whether it's virtual or in person, and the person who sticks their head up and starts talking is going to get their head chopped off. And I think people,
absolutely,
and they don't want to speak up, even in those today is you got to stick your head up every now and then and talk, even if it's going to get chopped off. But
but if you create
a condition not to do that, and
sure they are.
Our teams and what we've been trying to do is get people to talk, get people like you're saying to communicate, to be able to be that leader because everybody has value.
Yeah, if you look at there's only three kinds of work. I know this. We went over this when you and I were together. There's three kinds of work. There's only three kinds of work in the entire world. If you think of it like this. So there's technical work. This is the guy that works on the dock. This is the guy that hammers the nails. This is the lady who types in the information. They're not technology, but technical work. That's the bulk of all jobs, technical work. Then there's the management of that. So there's the management of work, which involves usually someone who used to do the technical work, but now they're managing people who do the work. If you take accounting during tax season, you've got the people that actually enter the stuff. And then you've got people who think about the strategy of how to help you through your taxes and so on. So there's a technical level, but then there's a manager that maybe have 20 of these people that they are managing that. So there's that management work. And then at the top, there's leadership. There's people looking out into the distance. They're directing the whole project. They're directing the whole direction of the company or the industry you're in or whatever the case may be. So there's basically those three levels. And I said that to say that what happens is there's a gap between leaders, top leadership, and technical work. I hear this all the time. I used to hear this almost on a weekly basis from people. They don't understand the technical work. Of course not. The CEO, board of directors, senior managers, they do not know how to actually do the work. They don't. They won't admit it, but they don't know. If you don't listen to those people and engage them at a good level, there's this gap between them, and the gap falls on the shoulders of a manager, and the managers are often take the brunt of it. So when they go to meetings, they don't tell you the bad news. They don't want to talk to you about the bad news. They don't want to be the bearer of the bad news coming up from the technical people to tell them that this past couple of years, we've had some bridges that have collapsed, right? This one recently with the container ship ran into it.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a risk thing.
Why didn't someone say something? You go back and look at what was happening at the time. You had people, well, we thought it was going to be okay. We thought we'd miss it, whatever. I wonder if they would have talked to the right people beforehand, we'd still have a bridge. So it's that's a little extreme, but that's the kind of thing.
The building that fell down in Florida, that's a concern. You were in Florida, remember, years back?
Right. Yeah.
Crazy. That should have been taken care of. People knew it. They wrote reports, structural stuff. NIST went out to do investigation and just didn't do this.
Right.
It's crazy. And then we have bridges throughout the country that are about to fall down. So this isn't going to be just a one-off. There's going to be other bridges.
No. And I say it goes back to your point, and Virginia's about risk management. It really isn't that difficult to mitigate the risks in a lot of these things, but you've got to talk to the right people. And the right people may not be outside consultants. Maybe the people that are sitting right down the hall from you. They're on your team or they're in another country, and most of us are working remote anyway now, but engaging them in the process is really, and that's why this model, I think it's been helpful. I created it to be helpful, and that was my vision for it. At least it helps. It doesn't solve all your problems.
Yeah. And your understanding with your model in high performance teams, what would be the best type of high performance team leadership using this model?
Going back to your and I's relationship in the beginning, a transformational type of model.
Yeah.
A transformational model is a much better model than transactional in most teams. Now, the only time I think that's not true is during the heat of a battle. If you're in the heat of the battle, you're trying to get off the dock and it's in a severe situation or in a storm. A couple years ago, we were sailing this ship out in the Atlantic and got in a storm and couldn't come in, you don't have time to have feely, touchy kind of conversations when you got 9-10 foot waves crashing around you. Or if you're in a war zone, you're in a, everything melted down and that's transactional. It has to be. We don't have time. But most of
those people in the transformational leadership that go into the extremes like war, really, especially with teams and all this, really do a lot better than anybody else.
They do. They do.
I've seen that. That's right.
Yeah. Let me be clear. Transactional works in one of those extreme myopic situations that occur. It doesn't work long term. It doesn't work for the whole strategy of winning the war. It's only when you're getting fired upon that something like that has to happen. Otherwise, the transformational model, which I'm sure you've either talked about on this podcast or will, but that transformational model is the model in my view. It's just after my years of being around leaders, training them, consulting with them, helping them out of situations. I look back on that model that you learned when we were in class, and I think if you had just done this, you wouldn't be hiring me to help you.
Yeah, no, exactly. And maybe we should have a little podcast on program management, construction management with transformational leadership.
That'd be great. Because I know people hear the term thrown around, but they don't.
No, they don't actually know what it really means to be that transformational leader on a project.
And this change model came out of the research and work that I was doing about the time I met you. And that's where it came from. That's why it sounds a lot like a transformational leadership kind of approach, because it is.
Along those same lines, I had to write my son a letter because he got into the Virginia Military Institute, and it's his hell week, first week. He's a rat and everything. And they said, hey, write him a letter. So I read him this really cool letter. And I said, what did George C. Marshall say about leadership? What is that? So I went into ChatGPT, of course, as I always do, Virginia. And I said, what did George C. Marshall say about this? And his quote was for matriculating into BMI. He said, there is no limit to the good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. If you don't care, there's no limit what we can do. And it's true. I don't care most of the time about who gets the credit. As long as something's good, it's going to happen. And I've always lived like that. I don't know why. And sometimes it's not good because you don't get the credit for it and you don't see the benefits, especially financial. I've written things, algorithms and things I just give away and these process and procedures. I don't care who gets it as long as it's program management. But that's just the way I think I am in general and with the company as well. And I hopefully will still succeed, but I think we
have a great example of that. Maybe as we're closing out, let me share something with you. A number of years ago when George Bush Sr. was running for president, my wife was recruited to head up one of his biggest visits to Atlanta. And she was responsible for the whole thing. It was all put on her shoulders. She had to go through all the clearances and the trainings and all this. So she becomes basically the program manager for one of the biggest things going to happen during the campaign. So she basically exited her job working with me and led this whole thing. At the end of it, when the president, they motorcaded him back to to Dobbins Air Force and put him on Air Force One and he's flying out, there was a big team rally then. And, so the leadership in charge, they got up and they gave away awards. They gave away plaques. They gave away flowers. They gave accolades to all the hundreds and hundreds of people that were involved in this. The only person that wasn't even mentioned was my wife. No one mentioned her name, but no one acknowledged her.
Right. She didn't care.
Nothing. Yeah. Didn't care. We went home that night, had dinner, hung out with the kids, went to bed, never a word not a word. Next morning, she goes to her office and there's a small envelope sitting on her desk at Lynette Chambers. It was on Air Force One stationery.
Wood.
She opened it up and said, Dear Lynette, thank you so much for all the hard work, your friend forever, George Bush.
Yeah.
Right? This was George Bush Sr. And tears were just coming. Well, the guy in charge told me, he said, we didn't mention her on purpose. He said, don't mention her. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of her myself. Right.
Yeah.
But she didn't care either way.
Yeah.
But it was just the idea. If you have that kind of approach, you're going to be blessed at some point. And, I have it framed. I'd rather have that little note off of Air Force One than all the plaques and flowers you could give me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes money doesn't mean anything in those aspects. No. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yes. The privilege. Bill's one of my favorite guys. Watched his career, and it's just as an old guy, just watching these people come up. He's done a wonderful job. He adds such great value to the construction, project management side of the world. It's just amazing. And I'm very proud of him, and all that he's been able to accomplish.
Yes, I owe him a couple more gallons of oil.
At least.
No, I appreciate it, Jim. And we got to get together sometime soon, preferably on that boat of yours there.
Yeah. Or anytime. Anytime. All right, my friend. Thank you. Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you so much.
All right. You guys take care.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
It's a long way home. Thinking about that city of joy.